This is the Music History In-Depth podcast for May 22nd to the 28th. This week on this overstocked edition of the pod, we discuss the festival that only money can buy, we hold hands for charity, and we celebrate the birthday of Danny Zimmerman's older brother, Mr. Elston Gunnn. Let's start by going to a rock festival. Back in 1982, Apple billionaire Steve Wozniak thought that his generation was a little too into themselves. Honestly, I think every generation is into themselves a little bit too much, but that's neither here nor there. Anywho, the Woz, as most people call him these days, decided that what the 80s needed was love, sweet love. And what better way to do it than with a rock concert and a festival? Now, unlike the now infamous Fyre Fest, Woz got help from someone who knew how to do these things from the ground up. He brought in legendary promoter Bill Graham. Off they went to Glen Helen Regional Park in the San Bernardino area of California. They built up a brand new venue, which Woz paid for out of his pocket, bulldozing and everything, along with a new stage. The festival was spread out over 2 weekends over 2 years. The first show was held on Labor Day weekend in 1982. How's this for a lineup for a show? The Grateful Dead, The Police, The Cars, Jimmy Buffett, Jackson Browne, The Kinks, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, Pat Benatar and Neil Giraldi, and Santana, just to name a few of the acts who were on stage that weekend. The second festival was held in late May of 1983. This time it was a 4-day show with Barry Fay promoting it instead of Bill Graham. This weekend was more historic from a musical standpoint. It featured the coming out party in America for both INXS and U2. It was also at this concert that Mick Jones played with The Clash for one of the last times, as he would leave the group soon thereafter. Van Halen also played, as did Willie Nelson, Motley Crue, The English Beat, The Vinyls, Stevie Nicks, and the Stray Cats, just to name a few there as well. Lots of people showed up for both events, but with Wozniak footing the bill, he still lost money, around $24 million between both weekends. Oh, also there were over 100 arrests, at least 35 medical emergencies, and an apparent murder of a hitchhiker who was going to the show. Go figure. Well, at least the Fyre Festival didn't kill anybody. Well, not that we know of anyway. Still, being a billionaire does have its perks, and the Woz was no different when he put on the second of his 2 US music festivals, which started on May 28th, 1983. Next, we will hold hands for 15 minutes for charity. I'll explain. Back in the mid-1980s, there were a lot of charity songs and events to raise money for famine relief. It started out when Sir Bob Geldof put together an all-star singing group for the song Do They Know It's Christmas? And that led to an American version from a group called USA for Africa called We Are the World, along with a British and American same-day concert forever going down in history as, of course, Live Aid. John Mellencamp, Neil Young, and Willie Nelson then got together and put out the American Private Family Farmers version of the whole thing. In order to help them out, they called it Farm Aid. The USA for Africa Foundation, that sprung up out of We Are the World, decided to do another project. And while all of the other projects were for African famine, there wasn't anything to help out American hunger except for Farm Aid, and that was really a benefit for the farmers. USA for Africa decided to change all that with something called Hands Across America. During this event, people would donate $10 to reserve their place in a line and hold hands in a human chain that was supposed to go across America. They would also sing a very catchy theme song that had been performed by members of the rock group Toto. They got a bunch of celebrities to help out by positioning them in various cities, and the idea was off to the races. Now, back to the actual song for this whole thing for a minute, since this is a music podcast and not an 80s event podcast. The song differed from We Are the World in that We Are the World was written by two of the biggest artists of the time, Michael Jackson and Lionel Richie, and had celebrities galore on it. Hands Across America was written by commercial jingle writers Mark Blatt, John Carney, and Larry Gottlieb, with the lead vocals being done by studio singers Joe Sarasano and Sandy Farina, and with a chorus that was backing them up called the New Jersey Mass Choir. No celebrities other than the guys from Toto playing the instruments. Also, unlike We Are the World, which hit number 1 on the Billboard singles chart, stayed there for a number of weeks and won a Grammy Award, Hands Across America topped out at number 65, and, well, that was it. Okay, so the song to promote it didn't do all that well. At least everybody approved of the idea. I mean, it's for American hunger programs. Who would be against that? Yeah, okay. So it isn't just the now times where everybody finds something wrong with everything. Believe it or not, there were actually protests against this whole idea. Not really because of the idea, mind you, but for really more selfish reasons. It was mainly because of the way the human chain map was set up. Yes, literally. The idea of the map was to have a continuous chain that stretched across the continental United States. However, that meant not including some states, and some people were really offended by that. For instance, the late Senator Ted Kennedy and the now Senator, then Congressman Ed Markey, both representing the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, were offended that the chain missed at least 4 New England states, so of course they held a protest. Also in Hawaii, actor Tom Selleck, who at the time was filming the TV show Magnum P.I. out in the state, protested with islanders because of the fact that Hawaii was left out. Not sure anybody would have wanted to hold hands in the Pacific Ocean to connect them to the continental United States, but you know what? You do you. I'm that type of guy. I'm an independent, live and let live. You want to stand out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean? Feel free. I ain't going to stop you. I don't recall if anybody bothered to protest up in Alaska because, they're kind of far away from the continental United States. Oh, dear Lord. Regardless, the event, as hokey as it was actually sort of successful. It raised $15 million after expenditures for local hunger and homelessness charities, although organizers were really hoping for $100 million. So from that aspect, not so successful. But still, $15 million is better than zero. Plus, even though some parts of the chain were incomplete in certain areas, for instance, the desert states, because again, why would you want to stand out in the middle of the desert for anything longer than, 2 minutes? They did figure out that if you put the number of people who participated in it next to each other, they would have stretched completely across the country, which did break a record for the longest handheld line by 65 miles. The Hands Across America charity event with a not-so-catchy, sort-of-catchy charity song that absolutely no one remembers other than maybe the chorus, which I think went Hands Across America or something goofy like that. In any event, that happened back on May 25th, 1986. Next up, Tom Petty was one of those guys I think people kind of slept on and took for granted. He wasn't revered like, say, Bono or Paul McCartney. Even in his death, people automatically went to his hits Free Falling and I Won't Back Down, thinking that was all the guy ever did. Well, they were dead wrong. Tom Petty, both with and without the Heartbreakers, did so much more. In fact, every musician owes whatever money they make to him for one reason, because he fought for his rights and in the process fought for theirs. I could go on about all the hits that he had, like Last Dance with Mary Jane, Don't Come Around Here No More, You Got Lucky, American Girl, Breakdown, etc., etc. But that's not actually why we're mentioning him this week. We're not talking about his birthday. We're not talking about his death. Nope. We are talking about him because of one event, his bankruptcy. Here's what happened. When he first signed his first record deal, what Tom didn't realize was that he had just signed away all of his songwriting rights for $10,000. That's it. And that meant that any and all past and future royalties, whatever he made, his record company and the people who basically screwed him out of his money would make 10 times as much. Tom first sued to get out of his contract. Then the record company sued him, claiming breach of contract. What he and his manager did after that was sheer genius. On May 23, 1979, Tom Petty declared bankruptcy. Now, normally you would think that that was a bad thing. What this did, though, was that at that time, all contracts and debts had to be renegotiated, which protected Tom Petty from both the record company's lawsuit and would mean a much smaller piece of the pie for those record companies. Clever. The record companies didn't want any other artists trying this routine, so they struck a deal with Petty out of court. Tom got his own record label imprint, but more importantly, he got his songwriting and his publishing rights back. In short, Tom Petty beat the record labels at their own game. And that is why he's important to rock and roll, and that's what makes the lyrics to his hits I Won't Back Down even more important. Tom Petty, filing for bankruptcy and in the process sticking up for recording artists everywhere on May 23rd, 1979. Before we continue, we'd like to tell you about the Music History Today podcast, where we go over the events that happened on that particular day in music history. The Music History Today podcast drops every single day, including weekends, on this podcast network. Now, back to the Music History In-Depth podcast. In this part of the podcast, we are going to go over a horrific incident and some major passings. I promise, though, we will end up this podcast in the final segment with some happy news, we'll say. First, though, to an act that shattered the joy of a pop concert in Manchester, England. On May 22nd, 2017, as people were leaving the Ariana Grande concert in the Manchester Arena, an explosion that was created by someone happened in the foyer of the arena. The blast killed 21 people and injured over 1,000 others. Many of the victims were young concertgoers, leaving a huge impact on the city and also the United Kingdom. The Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, better known these days as ISIL, claimed credit for the incident, although there's no real evidence of their direct involvement. Salman Abedi, a British citizen of Libyan descent and who was also killed, was identified as the perpetrator. Investigations revealed that he was not considered a high-threat individual by authorities prior to what happened, which raised questions about intelligence failures as to where and how this explosion was put together to begin with. Read between the lines and you can figure out exactly what happened, and I can't really say exactly what happened because certain streaming services will flag me for saying exactly what happened, because then they think that I'm actually telling you to do these things. But, you know, such is the life. So, read between the lines. You know the idea. As, of course, with a lot of incidents like this, there was a major outpouring of solidarity and, of course, grief. Manchester, the city itself, united and mourned the victims and supported all the injured. Ariana Grande came back to the city a few months later for a benefit concert to help raise millions for the victims' families. The Manchester Arena incident remains one of the deadliest incidents in the United Kingdom since the July 7th London incidents in 2005. It exposed vulnerabilities in security measures and highlighted the impact of such incidents on the general public. It also sparked discussions for the need for vigilance and awareness in the United Kingdom, among many other things, including radicalism. The Manchester, England incident that claimed the lives of 21 people at an Ariana Grande concert, May 22nd, 2017. Now, to a bunch of different passings we have. We're going to start with someone who passed away just as he was beginning to break through. Bradley Nowell was the lead singer and guitarist of the group Sublime. Through Sublime, Bradley was a key figure in the rise of ska punk, a genre that blended ska music with punk rock. Born on February 22, 1968, and raised in Long Beach, California, Bradley was drawn to music at an early age, we'll say. He experimented with a lot of different instruments before he finally decided to play the guitar. While attending California State University in Long Beach, Nowell met bassist Eric Wilson and drummer Bud Gaw, and together they formed the group Sublime back in 1988. Nowell's musical influences were pretty diverse. He had influences from punk music, ska music, reggae, and even surf rock, which kind of makes sense since they were on Long Beach. This eclectic mix became Sublime's signature sound. Sublime's songs blended catchy melodies with introspective lyrics that had themes of course, the usual social alienation, relationships, and personal struggles, which helped them gain a huge local following back in their early years, along with Bradley's charismatic stage presence and, of course, his smooth, raspy vocals that became one of the big features of that band. Sublime's breakthrough came in 1994 with the release of their album 40 Ounces to Freedom. That album, which featured the hit singles What I Got and Santeria, perfectly captured the band's unique sound and their carefree California spirit. And it definitely resonated with a generation of young people at that particular point. Tragically, though, Bradley's personal struggles would end his life kind of quickly, unfortunately. Just days before embarking on a national tour in 1996, he was found dead in a San Francisco hotel room on May 25th, 1996, from a drug-related incident. He was only 28 years old, and his career was just getting started. What would have been? Lead singer Bradley Nowell of the California ska band Sublime passed away on May 25th, 1996. Edward Kennedy Duke Ellington, born on April 29, 1899 in Washington, D.C., was not really going to go for music at first. Although his mother played piano, he really wanted to do something in the visual arts area. However, by his teen years, the allure of music, particularly ragtime actually, shifted his focus. He began playing piano professionally at the age of 17, composed his own pieces along with gaining his performance skills, you might say, on stage. Ellington's career took a pivotal turn in 1923 when he moved to New York City. And there, he formed his own band, the Washingtonians, which eventually evolved into the iconic Duke Ellington Orchestra. The band's sound, which was characterized by Ellington's arrangements and his musicians, who were extremely talented, I might add, was unlike anything that had been heard up to that point. You had Bubber Miley's wah-wah trumpet, and you also had Joe Nanton's growl trombone, and both of those sounds became the signature sounds of Ellington's sound. The late 1920s saw Ellington's rise to national prominence. A residency at Harlem's famed Cotton Club, coupled with radio broadcasts and recordings, brought the orchestra into millions of homes. Ellington's compositions, like Mood and Indigo, captured the energy and romance of that era. Ellington was always known to constantly push boundaries. He incorporated elements of swing, blues, and even classical music into some of his compositions. He was also a prolific composer. He wrote thousands of pieces for his orchestra, along with films and also even stage productions. His ability to craft miniatures perfectly suited for the 78 RPM record format made him a master at capturing a mood or even a story within just a few short minutes. Duke's career spanned over 5 decades, touring extensively worldwide. He also faced the challenges of segregation in America, yet his music actually transcended all the racial barriers at the time. Throughout his life, Duke received a lot of accolades, including receiving a Medal of Freedom and also a nomination for a Pulitzer Prize. When Duke Ellington passed away on May 24, 1974, he left behind a legacy that continues to inspire musicians and music lovers to this day. Duke Ellington was a jazz legend and an American icon who reshaped the landscape of music forever. Jazz icon Duke Ellington passed away on May 24, 1974, at the age of 75. Gustav Holst was born on September 21, 1874, in England. He was surrounded by music as a kid. His father was a pianist, his mother was a singer. Despite that, he initially wanted to be more like Duke Ellington and actually go into the visual arts. But much like Duke Ellington himself, in his teenage years, Holst decided to go more towards music, having been influenced by composers like Wagner. He started composing alongside learning piano, trombone, and organ, laying the groundwork for his future achievements. Gustav's musical journey continued at the Royal College of Music in London, England, and there he honed his compositional skills and befriended a fellow composer named Ralph Vaughan Williams, a friendship that would influence both of their careers. However, financial realities forced Holst to take up teaching, i.e., you can't really make a whole lot of money doing a lot of composing. So he taught, and that profession would actually occupy him for decades. Despite the demands of his teaching, he still managed to compose prolifically across a lot of different genres. He did everything from operas to choral works to chamber pieces and orchestral suites. A defining characteristic of his music was his masterful orchestration. He possessed an ability to draw out the individual voices of every single instrument. While Holst produced a vast amount of music, his most enduring work would probably be, for most people, something called The Planets, which was an orchestral suite completed in 1916. It was inspired by astrology and also the Roman deities associated with the planets, so each movement is a vivid portrayal of a celestial body. From the ominous power of Mars, the bringer of war, to the ethereal beauty of Venus, the bringer of peace, the suite showcased Holst's compositional genius and his ability to evoke emotion throughout his sound. And the most famous piece out of all of that is probably Mars, since it's been used in a bunch of different movies. Gustav was not afraid to explore all his influences. His fascination with Hindu myths found expression in his choral works, while the English folk music revival of his era left its mark on his compositions as well. This openness to new ideas, coupled with his own voice, resulted in his musical style, which was definitely his own. Though The Planets overshadowed a lot of his other major works, Gustav's legacy extended far beyond just that one piece of music. He was also a teacher, a respected conductor who brought his own works to life, and a composer. And when Gustav Holst passed away on May 25th, 1934, he left the world a treasure trove of music that continues to this very day to inspire a lot of different composers. Composer Gustav Holst passed away on May 25th, 1934 at the age of 59. Next, Gil Scott-Heron, who was born on April 1st, 1949 in Chicago, Illinois, was a powerful voice for social justice and a chronicler of the Black American experience in the latter part of the 20th century. Raised by his grandmother after his parents divorced early, Gil Scott-Heron was exposed to music and activism, like everybody else, at a very young age. His upbringing would actually fuel his artistic fire and also his social consciousness. By his college years, Gil Scott-Heron had already begun writing poetry that tackled social issues like racism, poverty, and political disenfranchisement. His style, blending spoken word with jazz and blues influences, resonated with a generation who was just on the cusp of trying to break free. In 1970, with the release of his album Small Talk at 125th and Lenox, Gil's career skyrocketed. The album featured the iconic poem "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised," a scathing critique of media portrayals of social movements. Delivered with his signature rhythmic cadence over a driving beat, the poem became an anthem for both the civil rights and the Black Power movements. Gil's music was not just limited to protest songs, even though that's what he's really known for. He explored a lot of different themes like love, loss, and just the basic everyday struggles that Black people faced back then. Albums like Pieces of a Man and Winter in America solidified his reputation as a powerful voice. Beyond music, though, Gil was a prolific writer. He published novels and plays that further explored the social and political landscapes of his time. He was definitely never afraid to challenge authority and also expose hypocrisy, which made him a huge thorn in the side of the establishment back then. Gil's influence transcended genre as well. His spoken word delivery and socially conscious lyrics are considered foundational elements of hip-hop. Artists like Jay-Z and Kendrick Lamar have acknowledged Gil Scott-Heron as a major inspiration. Despite facing personal struggles later in life, Gil's legacy remains untarnished, and when he passed away in 2011, he left behind that legacy that still to this day continues to inspire generations of musicians, activists, and poets. Gil Scott-Heron was definitely a voice for his generation. He was a truth teller who used his art to challenge the status quo and to fight for a much better world. The revolution will not be televised. Songwriter and poet Gil Scott-Heron passed away from AIDS-related illness on May 27, 2011, at the age of 62. Next, Gregg Allman was born on December 8, 1947 in Nashville, Tennessee. He was a cornerstone of Southern rock and was also a founding member of the legendary, iconic Allman Brothers Band. Raised on a healthy dose of rhythm and blues, along with his brother Duane Allman, he co-founded the Allman Brothers Band back in 1969, a group that would help to redefine the rock landscape at that point. The Allman Brothers Band was not your typical rock band. They blended blues, rock, jazz, and even some country influences into a sound that they crafted to make it more powerful and soulful for everybody. Gregg Allman's songwriting was on full display in the iconic tracks like Whipping Post, Melissa, and Midnight Rider. His soulful vocals and his bluesy organ playing became synonymous with the band's sound. Tragedy, however, struck the band early on with the death of Duane Allman in a motorcycle accident back in 1971. Despite this devastating loss, Gregg Allman, along with the remaining members of the band, continued to tour and record. They had a lot of success with albums like Eat a Peach and Brothers and Sisters, and I highly recommend Eat a Peach. It is literally one of the greatest albums of all time, according to Rolling Stone magazine. These albums showcased the band's musical maturity and definitely helped to cement them in rock and roll history. Gregg's personal life was pretty turbulent, we'll say. He battled abuses of one form or another throughout his entire career, a struggle he chronicled in his amazing autobiography, My Cross to Bear, which I also highly recommend. He also was married 7 times. He actually had a 3-year marriage at one point to Cher. That happened from 1975 to 1978. Despite all these challenges, although his marriage was pretty okay at the time, I mean, he was married to Cher, get real. Gregg continued to make music. In fact, he actually had a solo career for a time. He had critically acclaimed albums like Laid Back and Searching for Simplicity, and he had a major solo hit. It was the aptly titled song, I'm No Angel. Gregg Allman was a pioneer of Southern rock that still continues to influence countless musicians to this very day. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with the Allman Brothers Band and has numerous accolades for his contributions to music. Gregg Allman of the Allman Brothers Band passed away on May 27, 2017 at the age of 69. Anna Mae Bullock was born on November 26, 1939 in Brownsville, Tennessee. In 1956, she was just a nursing assistant going to the clubs at night in St. Louis, Missouri. One night, she watched a local band called the Kings of Rhythm at a bar that Anna's sister worked at. Anna loved what she heard, so much so that she started dating the saxophonist, which worked out okay because her sister was dating the band's drummer. What are you going to do? The band was led by Ike Turner, who was an accomplished musician, band leader, and label talent scout for some of the Midwest R&B record labels. One night, during an intermission, someone in the band decided to let Anna sing along. Her voice impressed the band so much that she sang some songs with the band during the next show and became a backup singer. In 1960, the band had studio time booked and were supposed to record with Art Lassiter. Lassiter didn't show up, so they let Anna sing the song. After all, they had the studio booked, and studio time was expensive, even back then. Anna's song was so good that the band was convinced to send it to a local radio station. The band was also convinced to change direction. Ike Turner decided to change the name of the backup singers to the Ikeettes, and he also promoted Anna to lead singer and gave her a stage name, Tina Turner. Ike ended up marrying Tina back in 1962, but they also had an extremely tumultuous relationship, to put it nicely. In fact, see the movie What's Love Got to Do with It, starring Angela Bassett and Lawrence Fishburne, if you really want to know the details. They ended up divorcing in 1977. Both of their solo careers would languish for a time, and at that point, and with Tina being a single mother trying to feed her kids with very little money coming in, things were really, really tough for her. Things were so tough that she had to take a gig at the Sun City Resort in South Africa, which put her in violation of the sanctions that were placed against the South African racist apartheid regime back then. Tina would finally get a solo hit single in 1983 when her remake of the Reverend Al Green song Let's Stay Together was the first single released from the Private Dancer album. Then she came storming back with the song What's Love Got to Do with It, which became an instant classic in 1984. During her solo career resurgence from 1984 to 1999, she released 5 albums, including Private Dancer, and had hits like We Don't Need Another Hero, Private Dancer, The Best, Typical Male, I Don't Want to Fight, Goldeneye, the theme from the movie that is, It's Only Love with Bryan Adams, and Better Be Good to Me. In May 2009, Tina stepped away from touring, although she continued doing the occasional appearance. The nicknamed Queen of Rock and Roll was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame finally in the class of 2021 for her solo career she had already been in as a member of Ike and Tina Turner. However, she did not show up at the ceremony. Instead, she did a video message. Unbeknownst to most people, Tina was suffering from various health issues, and they caught up with her on May 24th, 2023, when she passed away at the age of 83 in Zurich, Switzerland. The Queen of Rock and Roll, Miss Tina Turner, passed away on May 24th, 2023 at the age of 83. Now we're going to celebrate the life of Danny Zimmerman's older brother, Mr. Elston Gunnn. Elston grew up in Minnesota. From an early age, he was, like most kids, interested in music, so he picked up a guitar. His initial inspiration was, of course, the godfather of rock and roll, Mr. Chuck Berry. At a high school gig, Elston was so loud that the principal actually cut off his microphone. Elston went to college but continued to play, and when he decided to relocate, instead of going west to California, he went east to New York City, and it was there where he found his calling and made his mark, first acoustically and then electrically. He met his biggest idol, Woody Guthrie, played a bunch of clubs, and fell in with a bunch of performers who would all later become famous. Elston's songs later became poetic legends about social injustice and the Vietnam War. Once he got his recording contract, there was no stopping him. He became a symbol of the American counterculture movement and dragged folk music into the mainstream. He is now an icon with multiple Grammy Awards, a Pulitzer Prize, and even a Nobel Prize for Literature for his songwriting. In fact, he is known as one of the greatest songwriters of all time. Danny Zimmerman's older brother also changed his stage name from Elston Gunnn to who you, of course, know him as by now, the pride of Duluth, Minnesota, Mr. Bob Dylan. Before he was an icon, though, Bob made this album. Bob's self-titled debut album did not do well. In fact, it only sold 5,000 copies initially. On that album, he only had 2 original songs, and he did cover songs for the rest of it. On his second album, he wanted to write most of the songs. He had gotten quite political during that time due to his girlfriend, who he had moved in with. He wrote a lot about war and civil rights for this album. He recorded the album in 1 year, between April 1962 to April 1963. It was begun in New York, then in London for a while, before finishing up back in New York. It was towards the end of the New York recording sessions that his infamous incident on the Ed Sullivan TV show when he walked off the stage because the show wouldn't let him perform one of his songs happened. The album, The Freewheelin' Bob Dylan, was released on May 27, 1963, and was a hit. It went to number 22 on the Billboard charts, and even better overseas. It definitely did much better than his self-titled album. The Freewheelin' Bob Dylan had the now classic songs Masters of War, A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall, and Blowin' in the Wind. Bob is also famous for another event, because on July 26, 1965, an event that was so destructive to the sanctity of life itself took place. It is still talked about to this very day. Women still cry. Men with long hair still smoke a joint before telling the dark, twisted tale of how Bob Dylan went electric at the Newport Folk Festival. Seriously, people, this was a huge deal back then, at least to the folk crowd. Why? Couldn't even begin to tell you, but, that was them. I'll explain. Back in the early to mid-1960s, Bob was huge. I'm not sure how to describe it in today's terms because there really was no one like him these days. That's probably why he's still so revered. Anyway, back in the 60s, folk music was all the rage. The group The Byrds kind of kicked it into the mainstream when they did their cover of Dylan's song Mr. Tambourine Man. That song broke through, but by then, Dylan was already the king of folk music. That was helped in no small part to his performance at the Newport Folk Festival in 1964. He was introduced then by Ronnie Gilbert of the Weavers, who said, quote, "And here he is. Take him, you know him, he's yours." End quote. Folk people apparently took that to heart. To them, Bob Dylan was the Pied Piper. By the 1965 Folk Music Festival, that crowd that proclaimed him as theirs was ready for their Lord and Savior to return. What his crowd didn't realize was that by that time, Bob was going in a different direction. Only months earlier, he decided not to go with an acoustic sound, but instead embrace the electric guitar. He recorded the now classic song Like a Rolling Stone only months earlier and released it only 5 days before his appearance at the festival, so the crowd really wasn't ready for his new sound. So, how would they react? Well, not well. In fact, hate doesn't even begin to describe their reaction. Bob went on stage, plugged in his guitar, and went into an electric version of his acoustic hit, Maggie's Farm. The crowd went wild, and by wild I mean they booed, screamed, and called him some really not nice things. One guy even famously called him Judas, to which Bob retorted, quote, "I don't believe you. You're a liar." End quote. Bob was actually kind of shocked by the reaction, but his decision was final. He continued playing and recording with the electric guitar and continued with his vision. It is not clear if his crowd ever forgave him for changing his style, but it really didn't matter. So yeah, kids, Bob going electric really was kind of a big deal back then. He did it at the Newport Folk Festival on July 25th, 1965. After that, Bob released the classic albums Highway 61 Revisited and Blonde on Blonde, but then he got into a serious motorcycle accident back in 1966, which put him into such a funk that he went into seclusion to recover both mentally and physically. He went back to touring in 1974, became a Christian, and put out more award-winning albums, and of course he is still at it to this very day. The pride of Duluth, Minnesota, Robert Allen Zimmerman, Elston Gunnn, otherwise known as Bob Dylan. Born May 24th, 1941, whose breakthrough album, The Freewheelin' Bob Dylan, was released on May 27th, 1963. This final story is about quite possibly the most recognizable orchestral motion picture soundtrack of all time. Note that I did not say best-selling. That honor still goes to either The Bodyguard, Saturday Night Fever, a couple of others still lay claim to that. However, once you hear this movie's opening theme, hell, once you hear this opening note, along with a few other pieces of music that have become lexicons of pop culture, then you know exactly what movie this came from. On May 25th, 1977, the movie Star Wars opened. Note that I said Star Wars, not Star Wars Episode 4, not Star Wars A New Hope, just plain old zippity-doo-dah Star Wars, the way it was originally titled and the way it was meant to be. Disney. Anyway, we could go on and on about the troubles that George Lucas had in making the movie, how 20th Century Fox looked at it as a low-budget throwaway movie, about how it only opened in 40 movie theaters nationwide on May 25th, 1977, about how George almost lost the movie if not for the backing of studio executive Alan Ladd Jr., or how, whether it was done purposely or just dumb luck, that George let the studio take some control of the movie in exchange for George keeping the copyrights and also the merchandising rights. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant maneuver. That last one was one of those huge business moves that still gets taught in business schools to this day. This isn't a movie podcast, though, so we're not going to talk about all that stuff. I just mentioned it briefly. Instead, we're actually going to talk about the soundtrack. The soundtrack itself was not released until June 1977, a few weeks after the movie came out. No one apparently remembers when exactly in June it came out, so since the world first heard it on May 25th, we're going to talk about it now and not in June. Composer John Williams was born in Flushing, Queens, New York on February 8th, 1932. And by the time he wrote the score for Star Wars, he had already been writing music for film and television for 20 years. He even had a couple of Academy Awards to show for it. He won one for Fiddler on the Roof in 1971, and of course one for Jaws with Steven Spielberg back in 1975. Steven Spielberg, who directed Jaws and was George Lucas's good friend, suggested Williams for Star Wars. Even though Star Wars was a science fiction movie, both George and John decided that a non-futuristic orchestral soundtrack would work best. John borrowed heavily from the styles of the aforementioned Gustav Holst. Yep, he came back for a cameo appearance, along with Igor Stravinsky, Richard Strauss, among many others. Along with being the composer, John was also the musical director and orchestra conductor. John was also the orchestrator, along with Herbert W. Spencer, Angela Morley, Al Woodbury, and Arthur Morton. Lionel Newman and Jules Chaikin were the music supervisors for the project. John recorded the 800-page film score with 86 members of the London Symphony Orchestra at Anvil Studios in Denham, England. There were 16 recording sessions spread out between March 5th through March 16th, 1977. The first section of the score that was recorded was the Chasm Crossfire on March 5th, and the last piece was the end title on March 16th. There were 219 takes done over the entire sessions. For the record, the main theme that opens all of the Star Wars movies was the fourth piece recorded on the first day. Cantina Band music was recorded on March 10th, and Darth Vader's theme, the Imperial March, was not recorded because, contrary to some people's beliefs, that theme was not in the original movie. It premiered in the sequel, The Empire Strikes Back. Also, the main theme is one of the few songs that you immediately know after only the first note has been played. The original 1977 soundtrack release almost didn't even happen. Much like the movie that spawned it, 20th Century Fox did not believe in the music either, thinking that orchestral soundtracks were a thing of a bygone era. That all changed when their little throwaway project and tax write-off exploded in the first weekend and became a massive hit in only 40 theaters. That's right, kids. In its first weekend, only 40 theaters across America were showing the movie nationwide. That all changed in the next few weeks. The lines for the movie's opening were so long that the studio had to rush copies of the movie to even more theaters nationwide in the second week, with a lot of theaters having to stay open 24 hours a day for almost a year in order to accommodate all the people who wanted to see it. In my local Showcase Cinemas in West Springfield, Massachusetts, where I grew up, the movie ran on multiple screens for over a year and a half before it finally went into second-run theaters. By the way, if your parents or grandparents are telling you about how they saw Star Wars in its opening weekend, they're lying. Because again, it was only shown in 40 theaters, and they were mainly in big cities. So unless they were in New York or LA or Chicago, they didn't see it that opening weekend. The original Star Wars movie eventually beat out Spielberg's movie Jaws for the biggest movie of all time until Spielberg took the record back with his movie E.T. Of course, that record for highest grossing movie has now been shattered at least 3 or 4 times. Once people start asking about the movie's music, 20th Century Fox decided to finally release the soundtrack at some point in June of 1977, and for the record, no one literally remembers when it was released. When the soundtrack came out, it was a double album and was made for auto-changing record players, which were those record players where you could stack the LPs, and when one side of the first record was finished playing, the needle arm would shift to the far right, the next record would drop down, and the needle would reset itself on the record, and the record would play automatically without you having to get up and change it. Pretty ingenious, really. Therefore, the first LP of the soundtrack has sides 1 and 4, and the second LP has sides 2 and 3. There was 88 minutes of film music, but only 75 minutes made the original release. The movie's running time was 121 minutes. Of course, since then there have been 9 re-releases, minimum, special editions, box sets, etc., etc. The soundtrack won many awards, including the Academy and Golden Globe Awards for Best Film Score. It also won 3 Grammy Awards and was even nominated for Album of the Year, which is an extremely rare feat for an orchestral film score, at least in the past 50 years or so. It inspired a disco song by Domenico Monardo, better known as Miko. The disco theme, which combined the movie's main theme with the Cantina Band music, went top 10 on the singles chart. Such is the power of Star Wars. Also, you can't forget Bill Murray's iconic singing of Star Wars as a lounge lizard on Saturday Night Live back in the day. First came the sequels, The Empire Strikes Back and The Return of the Jedi, and of course the other sci-fi lookalikes. It helped to get other companies to revisit older sci-fi franchises like Buck Rogers, which was a Saturday morning movie serial which was made into a TV series starring Gil Gerard and Aaron Gray, along with Flash Gordon, which was another Saturday morning movie serial which was made into a movie that's probably more famous these days for its soundtrack that was done by the group Queen than for the fact that Timothy Dalton, who later did a couple James Bond movies, was in it. And, of course, Star Trek, a mildly popular TV show back in the 1960s that ran for 3 years on NBC, but then found a second life in the 1970s in television syndication, and then became the movie and TV franchise that it is today. George Lucas's special effects shop, ILM, went on to do groundbreaking work that it's still doing. Star Wars practically invented doing origin stories after the original stories had already been told by, of course, releasing the prequels. Then there's the way merchandising revolutionized everything, and then Disney buying the franchise and running it into the damn ground. But that's my personal opinion. Although, see Andor. Awesome, awesome TV series. Just saying. However, that should remind you, Disney, quality rather than quantity, just saying. As far as John Williams went, he became the conductor of the Boston Pops Orchestra for 14 years. He also worked with Lucas and Spielberg on many more projects. And he won tons of awards for movies like the Indiana Jones franchises, Schindler's List, Saving Private Ryan, etc., etc. The Star Wars soundtrack revolutionized the orchestral soundtracks, plus the original Star Wars soundtrack was voted the greatest American movie soundtrack of all time and was inducted into the Library of Congress National Recording Registry in 2004. The movie and its soundtrack has also gone on to inspire countless musicians, scientists, astronauts, computer engineers, writers, actors, directors, and many other professionals. In short, the movie and the soundtrack changed lives. Happy real Star Wars Day. The first time that the general public heard John Williams' iconic film score to the movie Star Wars, not Star Wars Episode 4, not Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope, just good old Star Wars. When the movie opened in 40 theaters nationwide, and only 40 theaters, back on May 25th, 1977. And that is it for this overextended version of the Music History In-Depth podcast from May 22nd to the 28th. Thank you very, very much for listening and or watching if you are on YouTube or Spotify.